Okay, well, thanks for the question and thanks for having me here tonight. Yeah, before talking about carbon offsets, I should really talk about emissions, and I should maybe start with our individual carbon footprints. So each of us, with all our actions, we cause emissions, and depending on what we do, these emissions can be higher or smaller. You can cycle, or you can take a bus, you can drive a car, you can fly on a plane, you can do different things that have different emission outcomes. And in order to arrive at the concept of a carbon offset, you first need to understand the individual carbon footprint. And then what generally needs to happen first, before considering even compensating your individual emissions, is you should look for ways to reduce your carbon footprint. So eat less meat, eat no meat, cycle, and all the examples I gave before. And then the concept of the carbon offset is actually a way that you can further reduce or even neutralize your carbon footprint, and that happens in an indirect way. So with the purchase of a carbon offset, you're basically financing emissions reductions that are happening elsewhere. So in order to visualize how that works is emission reduction projects get developed mainly in developing countries because it is economically more feasible to do it there. The dollar just goes farther just because of the level of technological development that countries like Australia or countries in Europe and North America have. You just manage to reduce more emissions in those countries by, for example, financing projects such as chlorine filters, water dispensers, solar PV, so solar panels on roofs, wind, and so forth. And what then happens is you take the status quo, you look at the baseline, and you say, okay, this is how many emissions are being caused at the moment. So the example I always like to give is a plant I visited last year, a tapioca starch plant in Thailand, where you use large amounts of water to wash the tapioca starch out of the plant. And then this water just sits in large ponds and starts fermenting, and methane or methane emissions are being caused, and they just evaporate into the atmosphere, 25 times more lethal to the atmosphere than CO2. And what these projects then do, the emissions reduction projects, is the methane is captured. It's an old technology from the 60s, really. And it's being used to fuel a generator, so that instead of purchasing diesel, for example, you just use the locally generated electricity and at the same time avoid the emissions. And the way that these emissions reduction projects and the offsets that you purchase work is you actually turn this project economically feasible. So it's in the world of emissions, it's called its additionality. So it wouldn't have happened without your intervention. So companies like World Expeditions actually drive this change and make it happen in the first place. And that's the concept of carbon emissions in a nutshell, I hope.
It is a complex topic, but thank you for explaining it so succinctly. Thank you, Tom.